Hi and welcome to this ecology video on how humans have an impact on the environment. In this graph that you can see on the left hand side, as the years have gone by, the human population has grown exponentially. In fact, it remained steady for several decades until suddenly something happened that meant that the human population grew exponentially, effectively doubling every single year. And this can be put down to having better medicine and better living standards, which is great for humans. However, the sheer number of humans, in fact there's far too many humans on Earth, we're in fact overpopulating it right now, is having a very dramatic impact on the environment, and this video will explore those impacts in more detail. So first and foremost, more humans means that more waste is generated. This could be fecal waste, and that effectively is sewage, and this sewage can get into natural water systems, polluting it. We also create a lot of waste from our household rubbish, and that gets collected by our friendly bin men and women, and we say goodbye to it, but it does go somewhere and it goes to a landfill site, and they're pretty ghastly and pretty horrible. We also need more energy, and this energy or electricity comes from combusting fossil fuels, which are running out, or using nuclear power. To get access to these, we need to quarry or mine, which destroys the land. Any nuclear waste that is generated needs to be buried deep underground, and that nuclear radiation will effectively pollute that land for many years. When we burn fossil fuels, we are releasing some nasty gases into the air, such as sulfur dioxide and nitrous oxides. These cause air pollution and breathing difficulties for many people, but in addition to that, when these gases dissolve in rainwater, they turn the rainwater acidic, and this falls as acid rain. This rain again gets into water systems and acidifies the water, and it reduces the biodiversity or the variety of living things that might exist in the water, because acidic conditions are not ideal for most creatures. Another gas that's released when we burn fossil fuels is carbon dioxide, and this is a greenhouse gas that causes all sorts of problems that I'll go into later. More people means we need more food. So there has been a massive increase in farming and farming practices and intensive farming. Intensive farming uses a lot of chemicals to maximise yield. Some of those chemicals include fertilisers, pesticides and herbicides, which can be washed off fields and get into the water systems, causing eutrophication, which I will go into more detail in a moment. These pesticides and herbicides are toxic and can have a bioaccumulation effect, which I'll go into in more detail in a moment. Most people like to eat beef, so more cows are grazed, and these cows produce methane, which is another greenhouse gas. More people means more space is needed for building and for extracting raw materials. So again, quarrying destroys the landscape. We also cut down forests and destroy peat bogs. Deforestation and the destruction of peat bogs can also contribute to the greenhouse effect, which we'll go into in a bit. So let's just focus on what exactly is meant by eutrophication. So let's take a water system like a pond, and in that pond you might have something like a fish living in there, and the fish needs to take in oxygen, so this is actually dissolved in the water itself. And you might be thinking, how does this oxygen get there? Well, there are aquatic plants that live in the pond that use sunlight to photosynthesize, and one of the byproducts of photosynthesis is oxygen. So when this is released, it dissolves in the water of the pond. Now, cue the fertilizers. And bearing in mind, fertilizers are put on the land because they're full of nutrients to encourage the growth of plants. When it rains, these fertilizers get washed into the water systems and can end up in this pond. And they would also provide lots and lots of nutrients for other photosynthetic organisms like algae. So you get this thing called an algal bloom, where these green sort of microscopic organisms start to form massive colonies on the surface of the water. The problem with this is that the aquatic plants that are actually beneath the surface are no longer getting access to light, which is a massive component of photosynthesis. So these plants can no longer carry out photosynthesis and they would effectively die. They will no longer be able to add oxygen into the water to allow any other animals to live in the water like the fish. So the fish die, and this sequence of events is called eutrophication. Now, the other big word that I've used so far is bioaccumulation. So accumulation is a word that means something building up, and bio is to do with life. So something building up in life forms, and that something is a toxic chemical like a pesticide or a herbicide. So a farmer may spray a pesticide on their field and not really see the long-term or the wider reaching effects of this, but the pest or the insect would eat this chemical and subsequently not do so well as a result. Before it's completely carked it might be eaten by a bird. So let's say, for argument's sake, this insect had taken in or consumed 2 molecules of this toxic substance. So I've done 2 red dots here. The bird takes in and eats this entire insect, and they've taken in those 2 molecules of this toxic substance. But a bird doesn't survive on just eating one insect. It might eat several insects that have also consumed this toxic chemical. So more molecules of this toxin are accumulating inside this bird, and then this small bird gets eaten by a much larger bird, like a bird of prey. And again, this bird of prey might eat several smaller birds, and those smaller birds might have eaten several of these insects that have consumed this toxin. So this large bird actually has accumulated a lot more molecules of this toxin than the insect ever would have. And this could have a knock-on effect. There was a chemical called DDT that has been banned, and it had this exact effect in the sense that no one really saw its far-reaching consequences until big birds of prey were declining in numbers. And the reason why they were massively declining in numbers is a build-up or bioaccumulation of this toxin meant that their shells, when they laid their eggs, were weak, and their offspring just simply wouldn't survive. So they banned it, the numbers of these birds of prey are on the rise, and it's all hunky-dory. But bioaccumulation is a serious issue. So now let's look at global warming. Here you have the sun, the atmosphere surrounding the Earth, and the Earth itself. Now heat that gets radiated from the sun gets through the Earth's atmosphere and hits the Earth. However, our atmosphere is made up of a whole load of different gases, some of which are greenhouse gases, which effectively trap heat. So if you've ever walked into a greenhouse or even a car, which has got a lot of glass on it, you will feel a lot hotter inside the greenhouse or the car, because the glass acts in the same way as a greenhouse gas in that it allows heat in. That heat actually gets trapped inside the atmosphere and gets reflected back to the Earth. And this would effectively build up the temperature of the Earth, making it a suitable temperature for life to actually exist. And this insulating effect is called the greenhouse effect. And the greenhouse gases are carbon dioxide and CH4, which is methane. Now, for absolutely ages, there has been a nice balance of these greenhouse gases that allow the Earth's atmosphere to be at the right temperature. But because of human activities, we are adding more of these greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, and that is making the atmosphere a bit hotter and the Earth a bit hotter too. So the activities are deforestation. So if you remember the carbon cycle, trees or plants are the thing that takes carbon dioxide out of the air. So you get rid of the trees, you get rid of the one very thing that can take carbon dioxide out of the air. But then what do you do with those trees? You burn them. And that combustion would release carbon dioxide back into the air, and whatever doesn't get burnt will decay, and the decomposers would also respire and release that carbon dioxide back out to the air. So more carbon dioxide, more greenhouse gas. Another human activity that's causing such an issue is destroying peat bogs. Now, peat is kind of like a soil that hasn't fully decomposed. In fact, it's just too acidic for decay. And as a result, there's lots and lots of carbon locked up in carbon compounds in this. However, peat bogs are taking up space, so if you want to farm on that land, you first of all have to drain the peat from all of its moisture. When dried, the acidity leaves the peat and decay can resume, and that decay would release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere quite dramatically. Dried peat also is used as a fuel, and when it is combusted as a fuel, it releases carbon dioxide, contributing to the problem. It also can be used as a compost. Like I said before, when it's dried and used as a compost, it will decay quite rapidly and release lots of carbon dioxide to the air. Another human activity that I've already mentioned is farming for livestock, and livestock like cows produce a lot of methane, which is another greenhouse gas. So the overall effect of this is that we have more greenhouse gases than we need. The Earth is getting too warm, and this is called global warming, which is a type of climate change. And the consequences that we are currently seeing is that land ice is melting, causing sea levels to rise in some areas, which is leading to floods in places that aren't usually flooded. Certain islands seem to be submerging in the water, like Madagascar, and that's a massive loss of biodiversity there. It's affecting the distribution of organisms, so because the Earth is getting warmer, birds are not migrating south anymore for winter, and as a result, those areas that depend on those birds as like seed dispersers are no longer having those plants seeds dispersed, and that's having a knock-on effect. And there are also organisms that might feed off those birds. Their numbers are declining because their food is no longer there. There is evidence that the mosquito that carries malaria is spreading towards us, basically towards Europe, because it likes really, really hot climates, and because we're getting warmer, the mosquitoes are able to breed better. Overall, these changes can lead to a massive decrease in biodiversity, and if it's a significant decrease in one particular species, it could lead to the extinction of that species completely. So I've mentioned this word already, but what is biodiversity? Well, simply it is a variety of different species of organisms on Earth or in an ecosystem. Humans are reducing biodiversity by causing habitat destruction or pollution or waste. However, there are measures put in place to try and conserve this biodiversity, such as to protect and regenerate habitats. So some habitats are given national park status, or they're areas of specific scientific interest, and they are looked after and conserved. The government also have quotas such as reducing carbon footprints to minimise pollution. There's a massive drive for recycling so that we can limit our household waste. And in the cases of endangered species, the numbers could be increased by captive breeding programs, which lots of zoos now are part of. And once bred in captivity, the key is to try and get them released back into the wild to increase their natural numbers. So lots of information in this video. A lot of it is common sense. The areas that you need to cover and really get your head around would be greenhouse effect and how that contributes to global warming, and some of the big key words I've used like eutrophication, bioaccumulation and biodiversity. Thank you very much for watching. Do check in again soon.